Tiana, for that introduction. Can everybody hear me all right? Is this functioning? Well, first I want to thank the organizing committee. I have to say, I'm with my people. Yes! It's lonely out there, I can tell you, and I'm sure you've all experienced that. So what I'm going to do today is to talk about the plant-based universal food guide. But importantly, we have got so much literature about vegan nutrition. It's almost really, it's about putting it into action. Enough talk, even if we did no more research and just spent time applying what we know, the nutrition-related non-communicable diseases would be the least causes of death and suffering and cost to your government and my government. So that's going to be the journey, and I'm going to introduce some of the highlights of the Universal Food Guide. It's quite detailed. So I am going to show you, it's openly accessible, so you can get it easily online. It has very important supplemental materials, 4 more tables in the back, 20 pages of extra references, and those you might have to kind of I found when I went to PubMed I couldn't easily access the supplemental materials, but you need to. It's very important. So, and then my colleague, Constantina Lomi, is going to be talking about the issue of translation of knowledge one-to-one in the clinical context versus public health approaches. And, it's not one or the other, but she's going to raise some of the issues that have been raised in the Swedish literature. But before that, she would just like to say a few words about our collegial relationship over time.
Thank you. Well, you may wonder how our common journey started. And it actually started back in Athens, 2000, December 2000. I was then working at the Onassis Cardiac Surgery Center as a physical therapist. And I somehow managed to get Elizabeth Dean from Canada to participate in our first international meeting that the hospital organized. This was the starting point for 2 things. I got engaged. Elizabeth talked about cardiac rehabilitation within this framework. And this became the starting point for me to get on board on a global network under the leadership of Elizabeth Dean to promote physical activity. The other thing that happened during that meeting back in Athens 2000, 24 years ago, was that when I asked for Elizabeth's food preferences, because I wanted to take her out for dinner, she said, a vegetarian restaurant. A vegetarian restaurant in Athens? From that evening, my twin sister became, she embraced the whole concept. It took some more time for me. So our journey started, mine and my sister's started back into Athens, in Athens 2000, thanks to this lady. I need to stress this out within this context. So besides my journey with Elizabeth Dean regarding how to promote physical activity on a global basis, around 2015, Elizabeth started pumping into my mind the word, it's the food. It's the food. Does this sound familiar from yesterday? Because all the time she was talking about, there is tons of evidence out there regarding the physical activity, the benefits of physical activity. And from that point, now it turned to, it's the food. So she got me to know the work of Michael Greger. I was so glad to see that his books are translated into Swedish. I have actually ordered them to our hospital library at Karolinska. So I do hope people will join at some point. one last thing before I leave the floor to Elizabeth. Prior to this article that you will soon hear about, Elizabeth published last year an article with the title Academy of Plant-Based Physical Therapy, overdue to address a nutrition crisis with a transformative population approach. So from this, now to this. And I do hope you will enjoy the journey. I will come into the picture a little bit later. My final word is that it's been a privilege and a blessing to join your pathway, which I would summarize with the 3 words that I find so exciting: the knowledge translation gap. This is what characterizes Elizabeth's pathway throughout these last 24 years. And I'm so blessed to be part of this.
Thank you, Dina. Thank you very much. Well, what I wanted to start with is how eating today, in the 2000s, is what smoking was in the 1950s. Have we really come that far when it comes to our eating preferences? If the tobacco companies wanted to sell their products today, knowing how much it has cost our systems, how much suffering, how much illness, do you think it would be approved? I don't think so. And when we look at now what we're consuming, and we're seeing the fallout and the dangers to our society, we're on a critical path. Now, today in the 2000s, as I said, going back to the 1950s, the tobacco companies were funding healthcare professionals to promote smoking to their patients. Actors were doing it, and athletes were doing it. It was promoted for pregnant women and was not discouraged for children. The state of the U.S. health was summarized by the Burden of Disease collaborators some years ago. And what the leading cause of death now is the nutrition-related diseases have now surpassed smoking. Herford and colleagues completed this review in 2019 of 90 food guides around the world. And what did they conclude? You think after 60 years of nutrition research that there'd be, pretty much agreement about what is optimal nutrition for humans? Well, there was for legumes, vegetables, and fruits. But it was all over the place, highly variable for animal-sourced foods. So, we began thinking about this. How could this discrepancy be? And it became fairly clear what would explain that. So on a trip a year ago to Thailand, and I was speaking about how lifestyle medicine could augment health outcomes with special reference to nutrition, which has become a special interest, I was asked by some representatives from the Ministry of Health to make my comments in more detail in a written document that they would take to their food guide advisory groups. And I thought, after all that work, I just couldn't shelf that project. So I took the principles and consulted several colleagues, international colleagues, who I knew integrated nutrition counseling into their practices very successfully, and invited them to be part of this unbiased, sustainable, evidence-informed universal food guide, a timely template for national food guides. Now, we had to come to some agreement about, how do you define a universal food guide? I mean, what are the criteria for deciding what is going to be good for humans? Well, we agreed that maximizing healthy growth and optimal health over the life cycle, reduce risk of non-communicable and communicable diseases, It should be food that reduces impairment and disability. It should be food that maximizes lifespan as well as health span and is associated with little to no end-of-life illness. So, as I mentioned in the Universal Food Guide, it's highly referenced, over 500 references. And so I do urge you, because there will be some information I give this afternoon that you may find surprising. So it's not for you to take my word, but go back and have a read and see for yourself. So how strong is the scientific evidence? In this integrative review, and integrative reviews has special criteria, we wanted to know, well, yes, what is the body of evidence? So an integrative review looks at multiple lines and types of evidence. And we wanted to know, what is the weight of that evidence? What way is, when you put all the literature together, what way does it lean? Well, first of all, humans are vegan by design. When Mills and others have conducted a number of reviews, a comparative anatomy of eating. Oh, I lost the word. And so what they did, they looked at 18 different aspects. They looked at the jaws, they looked at teeth, they looked at the digestive organs, they looked at many things and compared them across carnivores, omnivores, and herbivores. And that was that was very informative. And then we asked the questions, so where do humans fit? And based on the assumption that humans are omnivores, that is plant and meat eaters, where do they fit? Not at all in the omnivore category. They had no characteristics that were common to the omnivores. Humans are dedicated herbivores or vegans. So I'd like to take you back 300,000 years to our early Homo sapien, the earliest of our species. We all came from Africa. Food was abundant. Our anthropologists have deduced that we consumed plant-based diets. And the industrialized diet, which came later and was hallmarked by factory farming, high-yield crops at the expense of nutrition, and ultra-processed foods. But in this study, by in 2019, Alton and colleagues looked at nutrition and health in human evolution, past to present. And this was very interesting because humans today are 99% genetically similar to early Homo sapiens. We are 98 to 99% similar to our genetically closest relatives, the great apes and chimpanzees. Non-communicable diseases that are common in humans today are rare in our closest relatives. And when you expose non-human primates to elements of the Western diet, non-communicable disease manifest. Pretty compelling evidence. And Alt and colleagues, they concluded there is no doubt that we are biologically adapted to culture, but it is questionable how much culture humans can cope with. Now, the next slide I'm going to bypass because you had two excellent talks today, one on inflammation and one that included ultra-processed foods, so I don't need to repeat that information. Now, some of you may know Dr. Melanie Joy, a social psychologist, Harvard-trained. And what she is known for is that she has looked at the way in which we eat in terms of social conditioning. You know, we really did move away from what we actually needed to survive to kind of having a preference in our dietary patterns from social conditioning. And she coined the term carnism. Has anybody heard the word carnism? A few of you. And this is the invisible system that believes the consumption of animal source foods is normal, natural, and necessary. It's none of those. It's not normal, it's not natural, and it's not necessary. We have been opportunistic omnivores. When we left Africa, we started to wear clothes, and our food sources weren't as stable, so we needed, food entered into our eating pattern, animal source foods entered into our eating patterns and stayed there. And we learned to enjoy them and continued to eat them for quite a long time. Now, there are, in our review, there were questionable premises and carnist biases that emerged. And I'm going to just share these with you. This carnist bias has infiltrated our food guides. And I've seen this around the world, despite our being omnivores. It's been assumed that we're omnivores. The health benefits of animal-sourced foods has been grossly overreported, and the health-harming effects of animal-sourced foods is grossly underreported. And foods perceived as being a good source of some nutrient, or just a source of some nutrient, is not often optimal for human health. There's a big difference, something being a source of, and whether it is really the best source for humans. So other lines of evidence for us being plant-based. People in the blue zones are healthiest and longest living, and they enjoy mostly a plant-based diet. This information has also been supported by the China study. More plant-based eating pattern that you have, the healthier you will be. And the more you digress from a plant-based diet, the sicker you will be. A whole food, low-fat vegan diet is associated with superior outcomes to the Mediterranean diet, which was really the gold standard for a long time. And several international leading nutrition and dietetic associations acknowledge that vegan nutrition is healthy across all stages of life, including lactating and pregnant mothers. Vegans have the lowest carbon footprint. Now, in addition to humans being, let's see, here we go. And despite the importance of the social determinants of health, we now have to think about the commercial determinants of health, and these are really harming us. In this article, McCarty addresses these and concludes that what is needed is a national implementation of measures providing for intersectoral governance and protection from industry. Now, the next slide is an ultra-processed one, which we don't need to go into any further detail. 10 years ago, the alarm bells were sounded here in Sweden at the Karolinska Institute regarding the consumption of ultra-processed foods and corresponding increase in obesity. And colleagues at the Karolinska Institute are also doing their part to raise consciousness in Sweden about the health dangers of ultra-processed food, with special reference to those with kidney disease. Now, regarding the constituents of the healthiest eating pattern for most humans, so we had to look and to see unbiased, we wanted unbiased, evidence-informed eating recommendations for eating for humans. And two emerged. One was Michael Greger, he's founder of nutritionfacts.org, and the other was Neil Barnard's work, that collaborative Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. Between them, they have 65 years of having surveillance of the nutrition literature. So we felt confident and that they qualitatively and quantitatively agreed with one another. So the constituents, well, for the further details, do feel free to go to those references. But the serving sizes and proportions, of course, will vary across men and women, over age groups, and varying metabolic demands. But based on this information, we concluded that the role of Food Guide Advisory Committee members is to take this information and look to see what is nutritionally equivalent in a given country or region's context. And also, what are the serving unit measures You know, different countries have different ways of expressing the measurements of serving sizes. And they are only to focus on the science and not to predict or imagine what will people prefer, what do they want, what do they like, what is part of their tradition, what is their culture. No, the patient or the individual needs to make those decisions. It does not need to be influenced at the advisory committee level. Now, as you know, obesity is set to balloon across Sweden. There's a very serious concern, and it's catching up to other Western countries. And the constituents, what's interesting, as you know, we've all read about Ozempic and Wegovy, and these have been, compounded GLP-1 or glucagon-like peptide-1 agonists. The problem is that, these people who are lining up for this drug have severe side effects, variable benefits, and they cost a great deal of money. But a plant-based diet, according to those constituents, are natural GLP-1 boosters. It would be virtually impossible eating that way to actually be overweight. So, now let's turn to the Nordic nutrition recommendations, 2023, which largely inform the Swedish national recommendations, and examine how closely these recommendations follow the science. Well, let's begin with the consistencies. There is emphasis on legumes, beans, peas, and lentils, emphasis on whole grains, bread, pasta, rice, and emphasis on vegetables, fruits, and berries. Inclusions of nuts and seeds, and there was also mention in the guidelines minimizing the bias from industry sponsor in nutrition research. So those were all good things. And this is their listing, Science Advice for a Healthy and Environmentally Friendly Diet. Well, you'll see at the bottom, there's a big question mark for fish, red meat, white meat, milk and dairy, eggs, fats and oils, and sweets and alcohol, but we don't have real time to discuss those two. But what you'll notice is that, first of all, when you go to the references that are cited, it's very weak evidence to support the consumption of those products, and that you'll see words such as reduce, lower, and consume in moderation. Well, that has been challenged by Dr. Esselstyn and by Neil Bernard, both established nutrition scholars. And they have addressed this issue of limit, reduce, consume in moderation, and that those terms are defensible. Terms such as limit, reduce, or consume are only used in relation to unhealthy foods. And so it suggests to the patient that there's kind of a limit, that it's okay up to a certain limit. Well, I can assure you that there is no lower limit set for the safety of these constituents. And they also, these two are concerned that it complies to the patient that a little heart disease is okay, a little high blood pressure is okay, a little Alzheimer's is okay, and so on. You can sort of see the logic here. Moderate, yes, moderate. Have we ever told a patient, smoke in moderation? This doesn't make sense. So a few words about this Carnus lens. I'm just going to touch on a few. Vitamin B12, this particular phrase, B12 is naturally present in animal-based foods. And I kind of think that Axel addressed this a little bit about that it's in the microorganisms in the soil. So it's in what these animals eat and often in their food, in their water supply as well. So why do we need to get it through this animal? Why don't we get it through our food and through our water? Well, actually, that's difficult today because we have sanitation standards. Now, that's not a bad thing, but it does mean that for vitamin B12, we do need to have fortified foods or take a supplement because it's essential. Similarly, the Carness lens appears in the recommendations for iron and calcium. What comes first? Animal sources. Well, that suggests to the public, well, that, you know, that plant-based stuff isn't as good, that the primary sources are the animal sources. So that's highly questionable, of course. They also talk about fiber. We're fiber-fueled, you know, very important for your microbiome, fiber. And their guidelines, 25 to 35 grams a day. Well, when you go back and look at us in terms of our evolutionary history, that's very little. Very little. Back, 300,000 years ago, it was several-fold more than that. And then, as you can see, it has diminished over time to this very, very, very low amount of fiber per day. And this has been associated with the increased risk and rate of non-communicable diseases. In addition, have you ever noticed how many tummy problems, how many gastrointestinal problems seem to be around these days? When we have a dinner party, we have to ask people about their sensitivities. You know, when I entered practice, which wasn't a million years ago, you didn't see this level of GI complaints. So, to summarize, whole food, low-fat vegan nutrition is optimal. It ticks all the boxes. Healthier people, healthier families, healthier communities, healthier environment, healthier climate, healthier planet, and in the interest of animal welfare. Now, animal rights groups worldwide have raised serious ethical issues with respect to factory farming and the abuse of sentient animals. Animals that clearly experience stress, fear, pain, and suffer. Now, we kind of like to think, because we don't like to think about that, so we like to think that the slaughtering process is quite humane. Well, I can tell you it is far from that. You know, a 3,000 volt bolt to the head to make these animals are actually killed alive because it makes them unconscious, throat slit, hung upside down, and blood drained from them. Poultry, chickens, and turkey, well, how do we do them in? Well, we electrocute them in water. And for pigs, we suffocate them in CO2 chambers. Now, are these the practices of countries that really believe they're kind and compassionate? So these, we call them vegan, ethical vegans, who are vegan less for the health reasons and more for animal rights reasons. So it does create an ethical dilemma. And I think rather than hide it, you know, this is going on. And yet when you go to the grocery store and see those body parts nicely wrapped up in cellophane paper, you know, it dissociates you. And that's what the industry likes. It doesn't like you to think about what's really happening. Okay, so plant-based food, plant-based nutrition can prevent. A word of caution, because of the power of plants in terms of preventing and managing chronic diseases, we have to be sure that physicians are aware that a person is going on a guided plant-based program, so that their biomarkers can be tracked and that medication can be reduced. I'm going to turn it over to Constantina to pick up and talk about knowledge translation.
To make this session a little more interactive, I thought it would be good to discuss with you the question that Sibylla raised yesterday in the panel discussion. It's a study that came out recently in Sweden from Gothenburg that I thought was an excellent opportunity to bring up into discussion with this, within this context that relate to this bigger study. Those of you who were not here yesterday, let me first, may I switch to Swedish?
Yes.
Let's take advantage that I speak Swedish as well to make things...
About 8 minutes.
8 minutes, yes. Yes. When I was at home... No, förlåt. Okay. In my news feed, mitt nyhetsflöde i början av september så dök upp den här artikeln från Läkartidningen. Titeln: Livsstilsråd kan skada och tränga undan annan vård enligt forskare från Göteborg. Studien heter Guidelines recommending that clinicians advise patients on lifestyle changes. A popular but questionable approach to improve public health. There were 2 more studies behind this, but this one den här studien väckte debatt på Läkartidningen. Jag har sett notiser om detta i tidskriften Forskning. Jag har sett det på Svenska Dagbladet. Om jag ska sammanfatta författarens conclusion, summary. Mina Johansson tror att vårdens tid och pengar kan läggas på annat. Jag tror, säger hon, citat, på att man i högre grad ska låta vårdpersonal och patient bestämma när det passar att prata livsstil och när det inte gör det. Istället för att ge ett råd åt gången till enskilda patienter vore det sannolikt bättre att lägga resurserna på samhällsinriktade interventioner som gör det lättare för oss alla att leva hälsosamt. Okej. För att stimulera lite grann diskussionen nu så tänkte jag bjuda på mina egna första spontana reflektioner och vad jag gjorde åt det här från min lilla horisont. Jag arbetar som sjukgymnast på Karolinska universitetssjukhuset inom njurmedicinska kliniken där professor kom ifrån igår. Min allra första reaktion var, går vi baklänges nu eller? Alltså det är inte länge sedan Sverige var faktiskt det första landet i världen att komma ut med ett nationellt vårdprogram om ohälsosamma levnadsvanor. Och jag är välsignad över att arbeta i ett land som har faktiskt just dessa nationella riktlinjer när det gäller ohälsosamma levnadsvanor. Jag har faktiskt tagit till mig det här till den grad att jag har skrivit min kandidatuppsats i idéhistoria om just den ideologiska bakgrunden bakom dessa nationella riktlinjer. För detta går faktiskt långt tillbaka i landets historia. Det startade i mitten på 1900-talet. Social hygien, det här begreppet känner ni säkert väl till. Så det här har faktiskt varit en hjärtefråga för mig här i Sverige. Och plötsligt så ser jag att, och enligt de där riktlinjerna så är det faktiskt så att varenda hälsopersonal som kommer all vårdpersonal som kommer i kontakt med patienter måste väcka frågan om just ohälsosamma levnadsvanor. Och de har plockat fram stark evidens för vad det är för råd som vi alla ska inbjuda till dialog kring i våra patientmöten. Så när jag läste det här så tänkte jag, hallå, har vi inte tid med detta nu längre eller? Ska vårdens resurser, vården är inte dimensionerad för det här. Hur ska jag reagera själv på det här? Det har faktiskt varit debatt på detta, inte minst på Läkartidningen. Och min personliga spontana reaktion var att i samband med en annan presentation som jag skulle hålla i för mina egna kollegor på Karolinska, där jag skulle prata om just att främja fysisk aktivitet och fysisk aktivitet på recept, då tog jag upp de där studierna och den här debatten och bara faktiskt bjöd in mina egna kollegor till dialog kring detta. Och jag sa, det här måste vi svara på. För det här med levnadsvanor, det handlar inte bara om mat, det handlar i allra högsta grad även om fysisk aktivitet. Och Socialstyrelsen kom ju i början av året ut med man uppmuntrar olika kommuner och regioner att förskriva mera FAR. Och nu säger de att nej, ni ska inte lägga till på detta, det har vi inte råd med. Det tränger undan annan nödvändig vård. Så precis som, vad heter han, läkaren som pratade sist igår? Ja. Klapper. Precis som han sa, man får göra det lilla man kan där man står. Men det lilla man har som står till ens förfogande. Så vad jag gjorde var faktiskt att jag initierade en dialog om detta bland mina kollegor. Vad var det mer jag skulle säga om det här? I debatten i Läkartidningen så kommer tillbaka Mina Johansson och förklarar, eller förtydligar att hon menar inte att fysisk aktivitet inte har någon effekt. Det är en icke-fråga, säger hon. Men för att ge till patienterna, att läkaren ska ge ett papper till patienterna för och sen rör på pockarna i princip, det är det hon skrev, jag citerar henne nu, så säger hon det här är inte en effektiv metod. Of course not. Det är klart det inte är. Det är inte så man ska hantera FAR. Det är faktiskt en metod som har utvecklats i Sverige från mina kollegor från KI. Och det är en speciell tillvägagångssätt som jag måste följa för att just respektera metoden. En personlig erfarenhet. När jag var hos min onkolog för 2 år sedan för mammografi, på grund av att min syster är nu diagnostiserad med bröstcancer. Så vi gjorde mammografi och pratade bla bla bla. Och på väg ut så fick jag det här i handen. På väg ut. Och onkologen sa ingenting mer om det. Så när jag kom ut så tog jag en titt på vad det står på det här. Samtal om hälsofrämjande levnadsvanor vid cancer. Förstår ni? Alltså läkaren, check, enligt det nationella vårdprogrammet, hon hade gjort sitt. Hon gav mig en lapp i handen. That's it. Så ska vi inte hantera den typen av frågor. Det är min personliga ståndpunkt. Och när det gäller diskussionen med mina kollegor så sa jag faktiskt att det förebyggande arbetet, preventionen, är en identitetsfråga för vår profession. Det är mitt personliga ställningstagande efter att jag har arbetat i snart 44 år. Det är en identitetsfråga för fysioterapin globalt. Min tid är ute, eller? Tack för diskussionen. Det blev en monolog.
So just to wind up very quickly, when we're thinking about changing the system as well as changing individuals, there are myths that we have to address. That humans are natural carnivores. You're going to hear that from your friends if you mentioned that you heard this lecture today. Children need to drink milk. Children and elders might not have enough nutrition. All foods can be eaten in moderation. Vegan food is expensive. It's not. Look, read this and it'll show you how inexpensive it is, both for governments and for individuals. And athletes need meat. This are all myths. So we need, I would suggest to the doctors for the future, a task force. Why not? Because as Adina mentioned, these barriers to effecting health behavior change are at multiple levels. At the individual level, public health level, health professionals, government and regulation. So we need to identify the barriers that are actually promoting the status quo and the continuation of consumption of animal source foods and highly processed foods. So the solutions would be parallel, would be terrific to have a task force that would then take these solutions, make an action plan and timelines. As Dr. Klapper said, our doctors know very little about nutrition. He was the first to acknowledge it even today. And we need competencies, but not only for physicians, but for other health professionals. And I just wanted to bring this to your attention. Now we know how market industry influences food guides. They have all sorts of tactics, but I'd like to tell you that these tactics, they're more sophisticated today, but they are the tactics that the tobacco company used 50 years ago. So, the report of the Eat Lancet Committee, a very important report, was urging the world in 2019 going plant-based. Dr. Walter Willett, who was the chair of this document, concluded by saying food is the single strongest lever to optimize human health and environmental sustainability on Earth. We were very delighted when he acknowledged that he liked our article. It was very exciting. So stand up for health. If we, as a healthcare community, do not do this, Who will? Who will take responsibility? Sweden has a tremendous reputation worldwide, and you can make this change. If it starts anywhere, the chances are that it could start in Sweden. And you may feel like a small group, but I would really urge you that you could not only impact Sweden and Europe, but other places, because you're so well respected. I wouldn't miss that opportunity. So we'd like to thank you very, very much.
Thank you really much, Professor Elisabeth Dean and Constantina Lomi. And Lomi, I was thinking about Greece because I went to Kos in Greece, and the father of medicine, Hippocrates. Hippocrates, what did he say?
Yes.
Yeah, let the food be your medicine.
All diseases start in the guts.
That's it. So what? We are here again. We have always been there, so it's not a new thing.
Not at all.
We have known about this so long time. So it's so nice to have you here. Thank you a lot.
Thank you.
And
Thank
we have
you
a little
very
bit of appreciation
Oh.
for you.
That's